Hi, I'm Melissa. Welcome to Concordia Church Online.
Sometimes hope is a really fickle thing, isn't it? How many of you living here in San Diego, like me, had great hopes for a strong Padre playoff run? Maybe even a World Series ring. And now the way they're playing, well, I just hope they turn it around in time to get to the playoffs. I'm a Green Bay Packers fan, and I'd hoped that Aaron Rodgers and the Packers would figure it out, and he'd come back, and he did. So now what I'm hoping for is they get one more Super Bowl together, but again, time will tell. Because those kind of hopes, they're more a wish, a possibility, a dream. There's some basis, in fact, but we just kind of wish that they're going to occur. And sometimes even when those possibilities get close, then life intervenes and messes everything up. I'd hoped that life was going to come back to normal with all the vaccines going around, and then this Delta variant comes out and it looks like COVID's still going to be around for a while. And I'd hope that this vacation that we had coming up was going to kind of revive us. That was kind of what kept me going a little bit when the days were getting really long. And now there's all these fires around where we were going. So, I mean, we'll figure out somewhere to go, but it's just not going to be the same as it was. And maybe you know that too. Life's like that sometimes, isn't it? One sky is falling headline after another. Day after day after day. And when life's like that, it's really hard to have hope. But you know, it's not impossible. Because hope is actually part of our DNA now as Christians and as churches. It's something that Jesus actually puts into us. And it's something that's much different than what the hope is that we're usually looking at. Like I said before, we usually think of hope as it's a wish or a dream or a possibility. But the hope that Jesus gives us is a certainty. It's a certainty. And here's the big idea about that certain hope today. That hope, the kind of hope that Jesus gives us, refuses to take failure as final. And that means that even on your worst day, Jesus gives you hope for a better future. Hope for a better future, a certain hope for a better future because of what Jesus has done, because of what Jesus can do, and because of what Jesus will do. Because of that, even on your worst day, you can still have hope. So let's talk about how to find hope on those worst days. Worst day number one's like some sudden catastrophe. Might be like that COVID shutdown. Might be a hurricane or a fire or an earthquake. You lose a job. A person walks out on you. You get a diagnosis that's critical. That's what's going on in the story of Lazarus, John chapter 11. Lazarus is critically ill. And if you're a person of faith, when you're in one of those sudden catastrophes, what do? Well, you call Jesus when catastrophe comes. If anyone can help, he can, right? And that's what Mary and Martha did. They called on Jesus in a catastrophe. Let me read to you from John chapter 11. Lazarus, who lived in Bethany, the village where Mary and his sister Martha lived, was sick. So the sisters sent a messenger to tell Jesus, "Lord, your close friend is sick." Right? They're worried about him, and rightly so. It's one of these sudden crises or catastrophes after all. But Jesus is calm. Jesus, who knows everything and holds the future in his hand, is completely calm. Next sentence says this. When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death." A couple of truths here that I want you to see. First truth is that in a catastrophe, Jesus sees more than we do. He always does. And so he says here, this sickness will not end in death. Notice he doesn't say that Lazarus won't die. He just says that it won't end in death. Which leads to the second truth, that with Jesus, the bad end is not necessarily the final end. And that's one reason that even on worse days, we can still have hope. But then comes worst day number 2. You call, and God doesn't appear to be answering. I mean, you're praying in a crisis and nothing seems to be happening. Nothing but you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting some more, and the crisis isn't going away and it seems to be getting worse. Let me read to you from verse 5 and 6. Jesus loved Martha, her sister, and Lazarus, yet when Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. So Jesus doesn't come immediately when he's called. He stays where he was for 2 more days. He hears, but we don't know that he hears. And he's coming to help, but we don't know that either. And all we see is that Jesus isn't there where we wanted him to be. And that worst day is a really hard spot for us because we're leaning into Jesus in a crisis and we're not seeing anything change. And we're not seeing him show up. And we're trying to hope and trust and have faith because we're crying out, Lord, help. But God doesn't appear to be answering. And Jesus doesn't appear to be showing up on time. Which leads to worst day number 3, that the end looks like it's really the end. And all your worst fears come true. So in John 11, Lazarus dies. And when Jesus finally shows up, it's too late. You wanted a miracle, and all you got was a sermon. Let me read it to you. Verse 21, Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Now the sermon is nice, and the words are true, but what good are words when you need actions? Maybe even miraculous ones to get you out of the crisis. But once again, there's more here than we can see at first. What's the big truth out of this text? Even on your worst day, you can still have hope with Jesus. And with the word, the sermon is actually a step into that hope. In fact, I'd say that the word actually activates that hope. I mean, that's what I found in my life. The word reminds me of what's possible with God. And the word reminds me of God's past faithfulness. And the word reminds me of hope and future possibilities that maybe the end isn't the end after all because, well, nothing's impossible with God. And as the word activates that hope, it helps me keep on hoping in that future that maybe Jesus still brings hope alive. But then comes worst day number 4. Worst day number 4 is all the worst days have piled up and piled up and piled up, and you're drowning in your grief and your pain and your frustration and your depression over what's occurred and what hasn't. And all you can do is cry. Or cry out, scream, like, because you're angry with God. God, didn't you hear me? Lord, if so, why didn't you answer? If only you had been here, then maybe I'd still have hope. Then maybe things would be different. If you follow through John 11, Jesus heard that 3 times from 3 different sets of people. Verse 21, Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Jump down several sentences to verse 32. Mary said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And jump down a few more sentences, verse 37. There's these crowds of mourners, and they say, some of them said, Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Sometimes our grief and our anger and our frustration and our depression and our pain threatens to overwhelm us, doesn't it? But yet with Jesus, even on your worst day, you can still have hope. And here's how Jesus, in this spot, takes them a step into it. Two short little phrases. Verse 33, he was deeply moved and troubled. And verse 35, Jesus wept. Now, I don't know why it is, but somehow it gives us hope when we see that Jesus hurts with us too. When we see that Jesus actually understands the darkness and that Jesus feels the pain of our worst days, that we aren't alone. And that maybe God, who sees and understands, can still do something. Maybe even that he will do something. And again, even on that worst day, then we have a little bit of hope. Till worst day number 5 comes. That's when you see that the end is the end. Now, up till now, you've just kind of been feeling that the end is the end. Now you're actually seeing it. Now you're seeing that final is final. That's the day that you bury the person who died. That's the day that you get the divorce papers. That's the day you get cut from the team. That's the day that you get the 5th rejection letter after you're trying to get back into the workforce. And it sinks in, I don't think there's any coming back from this. I think that final is final. There's this great big rock, and it's not going to move. And at that point, hope, it seems, is finally gone. And it helped to know Jesus feels our pain, but this, it seems so final, except it's not. Remember that big truth that we're circling around today? Even on your worst day, you can still have hope. Because even on your worst day, even on your very worst day, Jesus can still show up and do something about it. Let me take you back into Lazarus' story. They're at the grave, and the stone is in front, and the grave is shut, and everybody's crying, and Jesus comes to the grave. And Jesus says this, verse 39, "Roll the stone aside." And they're like, but no, Jesus, he's been dead for 4 days. There's no coming back from this. He stinks. It's going to be bad. It's going to be disgusting. And Jesus said, "Roll the stone aside." And they did. And then Jesus says, verse 43, "Lazarus, come out." And Lazarus did. Well, what's Jesus telling you? That even on your very worst day, Jesus can show up and do something about it. And you know why that is? It's because Jesus himself did not stay dead. That Jesus, who died on a cross freely and willingly, so that the worst of the worst possible days for us, being eternally separated from God forever, wasn't going to happen if we believe in him. And then he rose to show us once and for all that with Jesus, the end is never the end. And that the failure isn't final. And that even death need not be the end of our story. That the story isn't over until Jesus says that it's over. And if that's true, and I believe that it is, then so is the big idea of this text. That even on your worst day, Jesus can show up and do something about it. Because Jesus isn't dead. He's still alive. And he moved a great big stone to show us that that was true. And some scholars think that the stone might have been 1 to 2 tons, 2,000 to 4,000 pounds, which is a big stone. Now, it wasn't so bad getting the stone into place. They had a little groove and it was slightly angled downhill so the gravity would help. But once the stone's set in place, that's another story. And this stone that held Jesus in, that had a seal around it as well. And then it's one guy, and he's on the inside. And there's no grip, there's no handholds, there's no leverage, and the stone is 1 to 2 tons. Impossible? Worst day? Maybe for us. But nothing is impossible with God. Jesus moved the stone. And his grave is still empty, isn't it? And because his grave is still empty, that's what gives us hope. That even on your worst day, Jesus can show up and do something about it. Now, 2021 was a particularly stressful year for me. I had my stress, I had my family stress, I had listening to my family stress, I had COVID stress for the church and for the school, and the long hours and the poor sleep and everything that went with that. And maybe the hardest thing for me was feeling that I had to hold everybody else up, that I had to give them somebody to lean into so that there'd be somebody they could lean into and find a hope that they didn't have. Now, here's the funny thing. I think when you add that all up, that really should have gotten to me. And it didn't. I don't know why it was. There was a hope in me in 2020, 2021 that just would not die, even though it probably should have. And you know what? Earlier in life, I might have chalked it up and said, well, yeah, that's me. That's who I am. I'm just good at this stuff. Now I know better. It's not me. I mean, maybe the way I'm wired by God helps, and maybe that's why God placed me, called me into this position. But that doesn't explain why my hope was still there in a year that tried to squeeze the hope and the life out of everything. As I look back, you know why my hope wouldn't die? It's because Jesus was always there. And Jesus was whispering that word, that word that activated hope in me. Sometimes it was a word I was reading in the Bible. Sometimes it was a song I was listening to. But it was Jesus activating that hope, and he kept whispering to my heart and reminding me of his word, reminding me of his promises, reminding me of his faithfulness, reminding me of his story. The story's never over till Jesus says that it's over. And then reminding me that because I'm part of the body of Christ, he's poured his story into me. And so that my story is now also hope. Not an iffy thing, but a sure and certain hope based in the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. And because I'm a part of Christ, that's in my DNA now. So if you're one of those people out there today who's kind of looking for hope, needing it, remember, that's in your DNA too. Big, immovable stone blocking your way. Jesus still moves stones. I mean, count on it. And count on it with a hope that's not just a wish or an iffy thing, but with a sense of faith and with a sense of certainty. You don't know when Jesus is going to come and move the stone, but you know that he can, and you know that he will, because you know that he has. And because he has, he can do it again. So, with Jesus, even the end is not the end. Failure doesn't have to be final. Even on your worst day, you can still have hope. Because even on your worst day, Jesus can still show up and do something about it. Are you in one of those worst day spots right now? Then wait with hope. Because it's in your DNA.